Okay.
Go ahead. You want me to do?
Greetings and welcome everyone. Today we'll commence our study session for the book Race First, written by Brother Tony Martin. The book chronicles the life and struggles and triumph of Marcus Garvey from start to the end, from start to finish. So, for anyone who received the link, failed to detect microphone. 1 second. For anyone who received the link, I just had mine up. Where is it? Anyway, the book, rather, hold on a second. I'm getting mine again. I just had it up. Now we start. I think when I open up the one on the computer, it knocked it out or something. Give me just a second here. So we had discussed the possibility of like using Audible, but I think we'll just go ahead and read it. And as we get into to later sessions, I don't think my phone will allow me to play the Audible and read at the same time. So we'll just go ahead and read and start it that way. Okay, so if everyone's ready, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. This meeting is being recorded. So I don't have the preface up. I do have the introduction. So if you have the preface up, I think it'll be good for us to start there, and I can go ahead and start the reading.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a digital version of the preface. I will have to read. I have the text, so I can read it. It's about a page and a half.
Okay, that'll be fine if you want to read the preface, and then I can just jump in with chapter 1.
Okay. It's preface of Race First by Tony Martin. Says, this book is based on the simple premise that no one could have organized and built up the largest Black mass movement in Afro-American history in the face of continuous onslaughts from communists on the left, Black reactionaries on all sides, and the most powerful governments in the world, and yet be a buffoon or a clown or even an overwhelming, impractical visionary. Distortions are not new to Afro-American history, but one would be hard to find a major Black figure who has suffered more at the hands of historians and commentators. This study attempts to treat Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association with the seriousness and respect which they deserve. After a brief biographical introduction, the study examines the major features of Garvey's ideological outlook as they manifested themselves both in theory and in practice. The last and longest portion of the book is taken up with an examination of the formidable battles which the UNIA was simultaneously involved in on a variety of fronts. Despite the personal animosities generated by these struggles, they were essentially ideological conflicts, for Garvey's revolutionary nationalism was perceived as a threat by a wide spectrum of opponents who had little affection for each other outside of their common desire to crush Garvey and expatriate his movement. Against all these desperate forces, Garvey prevailed, and it was only with his deportation from the United States that his organizational grip on the Black masses in North America to varying degrees elsewhere slowly began to loosen. Even then, his ideological legacy continued to be a major force in Black communities. A large number of people helped me in a large number of ways, big and small, during the years that this book slowly took shape. I thank them all. In particular, I would like to mention four professors who provided much encouragement during and after my sojourn as a graduate student at Michigan State University when the foundations for this book were laid. They are Professors James R. Hooker, Joseph McMillan, Harold G. Marcus, and Ruth Hamilton. I would also like to include a special word of appreciation for the inspiration provided by the several persons of whom I spoke who had been active UNIA members in Garvey's day. They are the late Miss Amy Jacks Garvey of Kingston, Jamaica, Mr. Charles Zampty, once of Trinidad, but for over a half a century of Detroit, Michigan, a founder of the Detroit UNIA and one-time auditor to Garvey, and Mr. J.R. Ralph Casimir of Roseau, Dominica, leader in the post-World War I years of the Dominica UNIA and one of the most active and influential of West Indian Garveyites. Queen Mother Moore, who saw Garvey in New Orleans in 1922, Colonel Von Dizenzy of New York, and the several members of the New York Vanguard local and the Detroit UNIA with whom I chatted. Thanks also to Mr. Herbert Whiteman, friend of Kwame Nkrumah, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the New York Public Library, Astor Lenin and Tilden Foundations for Materials Used in the Appendix, and the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History for materials contained in Chapter 9, which originally appeared in an article in the Negro History Bulletin. To the fool or fools in Harlem who broke into my car, ripped off my first 6 months' notes, and forced me to start over my research, I say, why didn't you take the spare tire instead, man? June 1975, Tony Martin.
Okay, the introduction by Marcus Messiah Garvey. Introduction, Marcus Messiah Garvey, 1887 to 1940. What do I care about death in the cause of the redemption of Africa? I could die anywhere in the cause of liberty. A real man dies but once. A coward dies 1,000 times before his real death. So we want you to realize that life is not worth its salt, except you can live it for some purpose. And the noblest purpose of which to live is the emancipation of a race and the emancipation of posterity. Marcus Garvey. History records that slaves, by virtue of their experiences and the knowledge gained in captivity in strange lands, have eventually become masters of themselves and in time enslaved others. Let us therefore use adversity as others have done. Take advantage of every opportunity. Where there is none, make it for yourself. And let history record that as we toiled laboriously and courageously, we worked to live gloriously. Marcus Garvey. Marcus Mosiah Garvey was born in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica on August 17, 1887. His childhood was deeply rooted in the peasant environment, which largely surrounded him. He once described an uncle. I'm reading from my computer and I'm using my phone audio, so I'm probably a little off on your script. But anyway, he once described an uncle for whom he sometimes worked as a sharecropper. His own parents also engaged in small-scale peasant farming. Garvey's was not a typical peasant experience, however. His father, a descendant of the marooned Jamaica's African ex-slave who successfully defied the slave regime, was also a skilled tradesman, a stonemason. Garvey's background further distinguished him from the typical peasant in that his father possessed a library among whose volumes Garvey developed an early taste for reading. His childhood was characterized by an adequate elementary education supplemented by private tutors and Sunday school. His leadership ability seemed to have manifested itself from the very beginning, for his physical prowess gave him a position of eminence among his peers. At the age of 14, by which time he had already became apprentice to a local printer, Garvey left school. 2 years later, he moved to Kingston, Jamaica's capital city, where he obtained work. By the time he was 18, he had achieved what he later described as an excellent position as manager of a large printing establishment. This was an outstanding achievement, making Garvey the youngest foreman printer in Kingston, and at a time when many foremen were still being imported from Great Britain and Canada. Participation in a strike during which he consented to lead the workers despite assurances of favor from management, cost him his job. He then obtained new employment with the government printery. In Kingston, Garvey quickly immersed himself in the intellectual and political life of the city. By 1909, his political involvement had brought him into the National Club, organized by a lawyer and legislative council member, Sandy Cox. Garvey was elected one of the assistant secretaries of this club, which sought to combat privilege and the evils of British colonialism on the island. In 1910, Garvey embarked on the first of his many wanderings in foreign lands. He went to Costa Rica, where he worked for a while as a timekeeper on a United Fruit Company banana plantation, and as a laborer on the pier at Port Limon, edited a paper, La Nation, harassed the British Council concerning his non-protection of the many British West Indian laborers working there, was arrested for urging workers to fight for better conditions, and was eventually expelled from the country or left to escape the authorities. Introduction. He continued for the next year or so to wander through Latin America, going to such places as Panama and Ecuador, where West Indian workers had migrated in large numbers in search of work. He observed the universal degradation of the Black race, worked intermittently to finance his travels, started another small paper in Colon, Panama, agitated amongst among Black workers. A Black worker in Cologne at the time, remember meeting Garvey around 1912 as he addressed the predominantly Black Cologne Federal Labor Union. There is a possibility that Garvey may have stopped briefly, perhaps in transit at a seaport somewhere in the United States during this period. From Central America, Garvey returned briefly to Jamaica, and by the autumn of 1912, undeterred by a lack of money, he was in England, where his only surviving sister, Indiana, was working as a governess. In England, he indulged his love of public speaking at Hyde Park's Speaker's Corner, was a regular visitor to the House of Commons, and worked for the Africa Times and Orient Review, the foremost Pan-African journal of the day. He found the time to visit Scotland, Ireland, France, Italy, Spain, Austria, Hungary, and Germany. Garvey said later that he attended some lectures in law at Birkbeck College of the University of London. By July 1913, Garvey was not surprisingly almost destitute, and he applied for government assistance, possibly because of his job at the African Times and Orient Review. Um, however, his article for the magazine was published in the October issue. He was able to eke out an existence for almost another year. By May 1914, when he was probably again without employment, the Anti-Slavery and Aborigines Protection Society intervened on his behalf, dispatching him to the council office with an officer of a contribution from the society, if the colonial office would put up some of the money to repatriate him to Jamaica. Early in June, the society informed the colonial office that Garvey was endeavoring to raise a fund to meet passage money, and offered to match equally any amount the colonial office proffered. Garvey managed to do, hold on, let me close the door. Sorry. Garvey managed to do without the largesse of these two agencies. However, he succeeded to do without the largest of those agencies. However, he succeeded in raising his fare home and left England in June 17, 1914. Garvey's first sojourn in England was of great importance to his career. The workings of British democracy made a lasting impression on him, and like later generations of visitors from the colonized world to the metropolis, he noted the contrast to the autocracy which the very same colonizers maintain in their tropical dependencies. He was often to call in the years to come for an extension of British justice to the colonies. England gave him an opportunity too to enhance his already wide knowledge of the worldwide suffering of Black people. In the pages of the Africa Times and Orient Review, there appeared regularly articles by and about such leading Black figures as Booker T. Washington, Edward Wilmot, Blyden, John Edward Bruce, W.E.B. Du Bois, and William Farris, to name but a few. Some of these would, before long, be his associates in the United States. Garvey also came into contact with Black seamen and students whose sufferings he observed, and with the many people of color who visited the offices of the journal. And the fact that the journal combined a Pan-African outlook with widespread coverage of Middle and Far Eastern nationalistic struggles, and indeed all anti-colonial struggles, contributed further to Garvey's growth and influence his future outlook. Garvey arrived back in Jamaica on July 15, 1914, his head bristling with ideas on making a living and founding a racial movement. To secure the former, he tried selling greetings and condolences cards and monumental tombstones. To secure the latter, he formed he formed five days after his arrival, the Universal Negro Improvement and Conservation Association and African Communities League. The title bore testament to the enlarged vision brought about by his travels and the fear which he never relinquished that weak races were doomed to slavery and possibly extinction. In this regard, he wrote, "For the last 10 years, I have given my time to the study of the condition of the Negro here, there, and everywhere, and have come to realize that he is still the object of degradation and pity the world over, in the sense that he has no status socially, nationally, or commercially, with a modicum of exception in the United States of America." Garvey became president and traveling commissioner of the new organization, among whose stated objects were the fostering of a universal confraternity amongst the races, the establishment of a central nation for Black people, the setting up of educational institution, and a pledge to work for better condition among Negroes everywhere. Amy Ashwood, who he had met at a weekly meeting of the East Queen St. Baptist Literary and Debating Society, became its secretary. The association was founded, she said, on their second meeting. A few days later, an inaugural meeting took place at the Collegiate Hall. Kingston president over by the mayor of Kingston. Recruiting was low, even though Garvey worked tirelessly and succeeded in establishing himself in the minds of many as an agitator and a nuisance. Many respectable Negroes who had not yet learned to love their Blackness opposed his movement. As Garvey wrote later, I had to decide whether to please my friends and to be one of the Black whites of Jamaica and be reasonably prosperous, or come out openly and defend and help improve and protect the integrity of the Black millions and sufferers. After about a year, the organization could boast only about 100 members. Up to this time, its activities were largely confined to Kingston. In November 1915, however, its first public meeting outside Kingston was held in Garvey's hometown of St. Ann's Bay. The Jamaica Times reported, right merrily did the people of the town turn out to listen to their fellow townsmen. Garvey had planned to undertake a fundraising lecture tour in the United States beginning this very month. He received an assurance of support from Booker T. Washington, but the latter's death caused him to postpone his trip until 1916. Garvey arrived in New York on March 23, 1916, for a lecture tour which he thought would last 5 months and would be confined to Black audiences, mostly in the South. He arranged for his mail to be delivered to an address in Jamaica during his absence and let it be known wherever he went in America that he was raising funds for an industrial institute to be established in Jamaica. Garvey's advent into the United States did not find him as much a stranger to conditions there as some are led to believe. For one thing, his wide reading on racial matter had obviously included the race condition in North America. More than this, though, Garvey's visit to the United States came in the midst of a large-scale migration of West Indians to this country, to that country. The toing and froing of persons and ideas generated by this migration meant that adapting to the United States was probably not too much of a problem for new arrivals. By March 1916, Garvey's sense of mission, his conviction that he had been called upon to emancipate his race, has developed to an uncanny degree. Shortly before leaving Jamaica, he had written in a letter to Robert Russa Morton, Booker T. Washington's successor at Tuskegee, "I am now talking with you as a man with a mission from the high God," even though he thought even though he still thought that Jamaica would be the main field of his exertion. He had nevertheless already mapped out the course he was to follow over the next few years. He wrote in the same letter, "I have many large schemes on my mind for the advancement of my people that I cannot expose at the present to the public, as in such a case my hope of immediate success would be defeated, as my enemies are so many and they are even anxious to misrepresent me. I have firstly to fund a press of our own and to get some working so as to demonstrate my true intentions." Once in the United States, Garvey found lodging with a Jamaican family in Harlem, came down with pneumonia, obtained work as a printer, and saved enough to start out on his fundraising tour through the States. He gave his address, this time as 53 West 140th Street in Harlem. By June, he was lecturing in Boston, and by November, demonstrating amongst the amazing mobility which had characterized his Central America and European visit. He had already visited, among other places, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. He had also met a goodly number of prominent national and local Afro-American leaders. Amongst them were John Edward Bruce, who he would call a true Negro, a man of whom he had the strongest regard, a Dr. R. Wright Jr., Dr. Parks, Vice President of the Baptist Union, Dr. Trinley of the Methodist Episcopal Church of Philadelphia, Reverend J.C. Anderson, who he described only as being a Quinn Chapel, Mrs. Ida Wells Barnett of anti-lynching fame magazine, editor Fenton Johnson, and William H. Farris. Bruce had been an agent for and a regular contributor to the African Times and Orient Review. Farris had once written an article for the same magazine in which he praised Garvey's October 1913 article, which had appeared a few months before his. Farris was later to edit Garvey's weekly Negro World from 1920 to 1923 and to hold a variety of high offices within the UNIA. Bruce, after an initial period of skepticism, became a regular contributor to the member of the editorial board of both the Negro World and Garvey's daily Negro Times. Until his death in 1924, he remained the staunchest of Garvey's supporters among the Afro-American intelligentsia. Okay, Garvey's whirlwind tour took him through 38 states and lasted about a year. He returned at the end of it to New York City, where he established a temporary base, Harlem. Only a temporary base, Harlem, only recently converted into the black section of New York, only recently converted into the black section of New York, where already the virtual capital was already the virtual capital of the Black world, its population composed in the vast majority of Southern and West Indian-born immigrants who was possessed of a rare vitality, containing as it did a high proportion of radicals of all types and a large number of outstanding Black creative artists, race uplift groups of all kinds abounded, and the main thoroughfare, Lenox Avenue, was a favorite haunt of soapbox orators. Harlem, however, was a bit it was a microcosm, was but a microcosm of the Black world of the World War One period. The subjugation of the African by European imperialism was still a fresh memory. In response to this, an infinite number of nationalist and Pan-Africanist organizations had come into being in Africa, Europe, North America, the West Indies, Central and South America, everywhere that Black people lived, and all looking towards the restoration of African independence. Apart from the African question, Black communities everywhere had local problems of their own. The Black man was almost everywhere in a state of subjugation. Garvey, in his involvement in the printer strike, in his participation in Jamaica's National Club, in his agitation among Black workers in Central America, in his travel in Europe, and in his formation of the UNIA conservation had dropped out of the title along the way, had long embodied the spirit of Black protest, which characterized the age. It was inevitable, therefore, that he should be tempted by Harlem, the most highly politicized Black community in the world. Garvey moved into the center of the Harlem stage with all the ease and self-confidence of the man with a mission. He took to the street, joining the soapboxes and stepladder orators, and formed political alliances with some of Harlem's prominent radicals. Someone who knew Garvey at this time recalled that he could throw his voice around three corners without batting an eyelash. On June 12, 1917, Harlem intellectual Herbert Harrison invited Garvey to address a mass meeting attended by 200 held at Bethel AME Church for the purpose of organizing Harrison's Liberty League. Garvey himself, before he toured through the state, had held a not too successful meeting in the course of which he fell off the platform. The Liberty League meeting was a windfall, however, because he was a tremendous success. Because it was a tremendous success. Shortly before, or perhaps shortly after Harrison's meeting, Garvey began to hold weekly meeting of his own every Sunday at 3 p.m. in Harlem's Lafayette Hall at 131 Street and Lenox Avenue. The meetings were slated to continue until October 1917, and Garvey was still being billed as head of the UNIA and ACL of Jamaica. At one of these Sunday meetings on July 8th, less than a month after the Liberty League gathering, Garvey's address was devoted to a denunciation of the conspiracy of the East St. Louis riots. The first New York branch of the UNIA may already have been formed by this time, for the association's address was given as 235 West 131st Street. The subject of this lecture shows that Garvey had once again demonstrated the propensity, as in Costa Rica and Panama, of quickly becoming embroiled in the purely local issues of wherever he happened to be. Garvey's first UNIA branch in New York, as well as a second attempt early 1918, was envisaged as being auxiliary to the Jamaica headquarters. Garvey himself, as president of the Jamaica division, did not hold office in them. Both these efforts to establish UNIA branches were disrupted by attempts by socialists and Republicans to turn them into political clubs. On a third attempt, based on the wishes of a nucleus of 13 members, Garvey consented to become president of the New York branch, thus concretizing concretizing a division that he had in all likelihood already contemplated, a decision that he had in all likelihood already contemplated, namely to cast down his bucket in the United States. With this move, New York City supplanted Kingston, Jamaica as UNIA headquarters. A schism developed in this new attempt too, but Garvey weathered the storm. The association's meeting place had meanwhile moved from Lafayette Hall to the Palace Casino, where it remained for most of 1918. Once Garvey had decided to remain in the United States, he moved on with renewed vigor. The UNIA was incorporated under the law of the New York under the laws of New York on July 2nd, 1918. On July 31st, the African Communities League was incorporated as a business corporation. A month or two later, the Negro World appeared, destined to become the most widely circulated of race papers and the bane of European colonists. Colonialist. Garvey initially edited it. The earliest issues were distributed free by being pushed under people's doors in the early hours. During the year, Garvey embarked on his first fundraising tour outside of New York after moving to UNIA headquarters. His first stop was Detroit, where he was hit in the head by a stone thrown by a heckler. On his return to New York, his secretary Amy Ashwood, who had accompanied him, was summoned to the district attorney's office, a total, she wrote later, of 17 times. The authorities, it seems, suspected Garvey of raising funds for a non-existent Back to Africa enterprises. On November 11, 1918, the New York Times reported a meeting of 5,000 persons presided over by Garvey at the Palace Casino. The meeting celebrated the end of World War I by calling on the Allied power to hand over the ex-German colonies in Africa to Black rule. Several persons, amongst them socialist A. Philip Randolph and Ida Wells Barnett, were nominated at the meeting to lobby on behalf of the UNIA at the upcoming Paris Peace Conference. The UNIA eventually dispatched Asian as a high commissioner to lobby during the conference, since most Afro-Americans were being denied passport to France by the United States government. Shortly after the November meeting, Mrs. Wells Barnett addressed a UNIA gathering in New York. On this occasion, however, she annoyed Garvey by advising against the idea of a return to Africa and the establishment of what was subsequently to become the Black Star Line Steamship Corporation. Like most people who saw Garvey in action, she later testified to the remarkable sway which he exercised over his audience. By 1919, Garvey was already firmly established as one of Harlem's most important radical figures. And it was during this year that his fame spread over the globe. Before the year had ended, he would be regularly discussed in the press and in governmental circles in Europe, Africa, the West Indies, and elsewhere. In March 1919, at another large meeting at the Palace Casino, Garvey claimed that W.E.B. Du Bois had humbugged the activities of his High Commissioner in France. The desire for an Afro-American lobby at the Paris Peace Conference was also responsible for bringing together a group of Harlem radicals and other prominent individuals at the home of wealthy but race-conscious Madam C.J. Walker. Garvey was among those present at this meeting, out of which grew the short-lived International League of Darker Peoples. In June 1919, Garvey incorporated his Black Star Line Steamship Corporation. By this time, Garvey claimed later the UNIA had about 30 branches and over 30 million members. This figure apparently included sympathizers as well as members in any strict sense. But the spread of his ideas by this time could not be gainsaid. As early as 1918, the Negro world had been reaching places as far as Panama and throughout 1919, Garveyites were blamed by colonial authorities for anti-white riots in Jamaica, Trinidad, and British Honduras, among other places. In October 1919, Garvey fast approaching the peak of his career, had his closest escape from an untimely death. Several shots were fired at him by one George Tyler, two of which found their mark. The wounds were minor, however. Taylor died mysteriously, supposedly jumping to his death from the cell where he was awaiting a court appearance. It was widely suspected that he planned to implicate others in his assassination attempt. A little over 2 months after this attempt on his life, on Christmas Day, 1919, Garvey married Amy Ashwood during a lavish spectacle at Liberty Hall, now the UNIA's own meeting place. In 1916, she had left Jamaica for Panama, but had become reunited with Garvey in the spring of 1918 when she moved to the United States. The marriage was over by early 1920, the couple having parted company amid a welter of accusations and counter accusations concerning infidelity, financial misdealings, and political strategies. The year 1920 witnessed the first International Convention of the Negro Peoples of the World organized by Garvey. At the opening session at Madison Square Garden, New York, an overflow crowd of 25,000 filled the arena and spilled out into the streets. The other sessions took place in Liberty Hall in Harlem. Delegates who came from all over the Black world adopted the Declaration of Rights of the Negro peoples of the world. The Declaration listed the main grievances of the race and demanded their resolution. Notice was served on European colonists that the Black man had an inherent right to possess himself of Africa, regardless of the claims of any other race or nation. Demands were made for the capitalization of the N in Negro, for the teaching of Black history in schools, and for an end to lynching and sundry sundry other discriminations. The red, black, and green were adopted as the colors of the race. August 31st, the last day of the month-long convention, was proclaimed an international holiday for Black people, and the universal Ethiopian anthem was adopted. During the course of the convention, Garvey was elected President General of the UNIA and Provisional President of Africa. The mayor of Monrovia, Liberia, Gabrielle Johnson, was elected Supreme Potentate or ceremonial leader. Several others were elected leaders of various parts of the Black world. Also in 1920 was the birth of the UNIA's Negro Factories Corporation, which over the next 2 or 3 years managed a number of UNIA businesses, including laundries, restaurants, a doll factory, tailoring, and military establishments, and printing press. Some of these ventures had been in operation since 1918, for Ida Wells Barnett reporting having been shown a UNIA restaurant and some unspecified smaller undertakings by Garvey in that year. By 1921, Garvey was unquestionably the leader of the largest organization of its type in the history of the race. He had succeeded as no one else had in gathering up the worldwide feeling of dismay at the loss of independence and defiance against colonialism and oppression, which characterized the new Negro spirit of the age. As of August 1st, 1921, the UNIA contained 418 chartered divisions, up from 95 a year earlier, plus 420 not yet chartered. There were, in addition, 19 chapters, none that previous year, making a total of 859 branches. Garvey's unparalleled success had the effect of arraying against him a most powerful conglomeration of hostile forces. The United States government was against him because they considered all Black radicals subversive. European governments were against him because he was a threat to the stability of their colonies. The communists were against him because he successfully kept Black workers out of their grasp. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and other integrational organizations were against him because he argued that white segregationists were the true spokesman for white America, and because he in turn advocated Black separatism. His organization also had to contend with unscrupulous opportunists who were not above sabotaging its working for personal gains. In 1921, opposition from all these forces escalated to a remarkable extent. First, the United States Department of State's almost prevented Garvey from re-entering the country after a short trip to the Caribbean. He managed to make it back, however, barely in time for his second international convention. Then, at his annual convention, the communists, spearheaded by their Black auxiliary, the African Brotherhood, made an unsuccessful bid to capture his following. Meanwhile, the NAACP thought its major Black spokesman, W.E.B. through its major Black spokesman, W.E.B. Du Bois, was steadily increasing its campaign of attack in its organ, the crisis, and elsewhere. Anyway, the black socialists too had begun to criticize Garvey, and the British authorities were busy pursuing the policy they had began in 1919 of banning the Negro world, prohibiting UNI officials from entering their colonies, and generally doing whatever they could to thwart the spread of Garvey's influence. Finally, on January 12, 1922, Garvey was arrested for alleged mail fraud. This was a signal for redoubled efforts on the part of his enemies, who presumed his guilt and called for his arrest and deportation. Despite all of this, the UNIA managed to push ahead. The Daily Negro Times appeared in 1922, and a Black Man's Magazine was projected but did not, in fact, appear until much later. Garvey's second marriage took place during this year to his private secretary, Amy Jacks. In 1923, he was convicted on the mail fraud charges in connection with the Black Star Line. Yet Garvey was now claiming a membership of 6,900,000 branches. 500 of the branches and a little less than half of the membership were said to be in the United States. Garvey's first full year as a free man in the United States was 1924. During this year, the remarkable faith which his followers placed in him was again demonstrated when they subscribed enough to launch a new steamship line, the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company. The year 1924 also saw blocking of Garvey's intentions to set up a base in Liberia. During this year, too, the UNIA launches Negro political union designed to bring its voting strength to bear on America and other elections by endorsing candidates based on their record of dealings with the race, irrespective of party affiliation. In February 1925, Garvey's appeal was turned down, and he entered the federal penitentiary at Atlanta. What his enemies hoped to obtain through his imprisonment did come to pass. schisms appeared in the American movement, resulting by 1926 in a splinter in the New York branch, the largest of all, estimated at 35,000 members at one time. Wow. These strains, occasioned by Garvey's departure, were, however, still relatively minor, for Garvey, even from jail, managed to maintain some control, appointing and dismissing officers and conferring with his aides. At an extraordinary conference in Detroit in 1926, the Secretary General, Emmanuel Carter, reported 814 domestic branches, 215 foreign, and 19 new ones, whether foreign or domestic, not specified, for a grand total of 1,120. There were 25 pending applications for charters. The discovery in 1970 of UNIA records, including membership files, provides a unique opportunity to verify these figures. According to the data in these records, mostly compiled from 1925 through 1928, there were 725 UNIA branches in the United States, possibly 723 see the appendix, and 271 outside the United States, possibly 273, making a grand total of 996. The data, excluding 11 branches, not cataloged according to locations, is summarized in Table 1 and 2. So we see Table 1, distribution of UNI branches in the United States. We see the states and the number of branches within each states. So we can study that. That's probably going to have, there's some test questions may come from this chart. So we need to pay attention to it. Okay, so several interesting and possibly surprising facts emerge from this new information. First of all, if the number of branches in a given area can be taken to indicate the extent of UNIA penetration, then the southern United States was the most thoroughly UNIA-oriented area in the world. Louisiana was far and away the most thoroughly Garveyite state, with a total of 74 branches. The top 3 states in the United States were in the South, and only 3 of the top 3 were in the North. And then you see that displayed here, so we can take a look at these, and we're probably going to have test questions from both of these charts. So these findings,
excuse me, Sister Diane,
maybe,
can I take a screenshot of the second one, the second chart?
okay, sure, sorry. Good? Good? Are you good? Hello? Sister,
Lady President, we can't hear you if you're good. Are we good to proceed? Okay, I'm gonna take that as no objection. Back to you, Sister Diane, whenever you're ready.
okay. These findings may be tempered somewhat, but only somewhat, by the fact that some of the largest single branches were probably in such northern cities as New York and Chicago. In all, the UNIA was represented in 38 of the United States. It was not only the organization of the newly urbanized Afro-Americans. It was also the organization of the great mass of Black peasants all over the South, Southwest, and elsewhere. Outside the United States, Cuba led with 42 branches, more than any single United States state except Louisiana. The Greater Caribbean, including Central America and northern South America, was undoubtedly the biggest Garveyite stronghold outside of the United States. South Africa was the most thoroughly organized of the African countries. No area of significant Black population in the world was without a UNIA branch. This included Canada, Europe, and Australia. The data suggests that the Detroit report of 1926 was accurate. The slight discrepancy in figures is probably due to no greater cause than the loss of some membership card during the decades preceding their rediscovery. For there were branches in such places as Dahomey, the Belgian Congo, and areas in Trinidad, which do not appear among the record. An important conclusion to be drawn from the figures in this chapter is that the UNIA can continue to expand after Garvey's 1925 incarceration. Some branches were undoubtedly disbanding even as new ones were being added. But the evidence as to how many is inconclusive. Certainly, by 1926, some branches were not sending up-to-date information to the headquarters, but this had always been a problem and did not necessarily indicate lack of activity in those branches. So, meanwhile, the clamor for Garvey's release mounted. At one demonstration in Harlem, an estimated 150,000 marched and jammed the sidewalk. The government, bewildered by the depth of feeling shown for someone they like to characterize as a crook, and perhaps viewing with apprehension the upcoming election year, decided to commute his sentence, but with deportation. 5,000 loyal followers on hand at New Orleans to listen to Garvey's farewell address from the deck of the vessel taking him to the Caribbean. They stood in the rain and sang the UNIA hymn, "God Bless Our President," as the ship pulled away, bearing their leader from the scene of his greatest triumph, never to set foot in the United States again. When the ship stopped in Panama, Garvey was greeted by a delegation of UNIA, the local UNIA, and in Jamaica, when he arrived in December 10, 1927, he was given a hero's welcome as some of the largest crowd in the island's history turned out to greet him. None dismayed by his deportation, Garvey set out, making the most of his adversity. In 1929, he visited England, presented a renewed petition to the League of Nations, and briefly visited Canada. In August 1929, Garvey held the 6th International Convention in Jamaica. It was as spectacular as the earlier ones in Harlem. A split occurring at the convention resulted in the formation of a separate UNIA headquartered in the United States. Garvey remained head of his faction, now calling itself the UNIA and ACL, August 29, of the world. The American schematics did not carry the whole American field with them. They failed, for example, to win control of the Negro world, which continue to carry Garvey's pronouncements. Units loyal to Garvey often changed their names to Garvey's Club, Ethiopian clubs, and the like, and anonymously between the two groups in the United States occasionally led to an animosity between the two groups in the United States occasionally led to violence. In the year 1929, marked too Garvey's most direct incursions into Jamaican electoral politics. Between the convention and the end of the year, he found the People's Political Party, began campaigning for a seat in the Legislative Council, was jailed for 3 months for contempt by British judge when he promised to reform the bench if elected, and was elected to Kingston and St. Andrews Corporation council while in jail. Upon his release, the corporation promptly declared his seat vacant, but he was returned unopposed early in 1930. Meanwhile, the British judge convicted him again, this time for supposedly libeling British colonialism in an editorial in the Black Man newspaper. Garvey's bid for the Legislative Council was defeated in January 1930, largely because the majority of the Black masses still had no vote under British colonialism. His PPP nonetheless successfully placed some candidates in both the KSAC and the Legislative Council. Garvey himself continued to serve on the KSAC Council for the next few years. On one occasion, 1931, being re-elected while out of the country. During this period, Garvey occasionally acted as a de facto trade union leader, taking up the causes of unorganized workers. In 1931, Garvey made yet another trip to England and the League of Nations. Back in Jamaica, he continued to hold political meetings, formed an amusement company and dabbled in real estate. A 7th International Convention was held in Jamaica in 1934, followed some months later by a shift of his base of operation to England. In England, Garvey contacted African students. Orange, I'm not sure what that is. The crowd at Hyde Park Speaker's Corner, and managed to keep together those divisions of the UNIA that had survived the Depression, the schism, following his deportation from the United States and the inroads into his erstwhile followers, especially in the United States, made by Father Divine Muslims, the peace movement of Ethiopia, the communists, diverse other groups. His organization in the United States remained viable, and in 1936, 1937, and 1938, Garvey visited Canada to meet with his North American followers, who would on those occasions cross the borders in large numbers and would, among other things, attend Garvey's School of African Philosophy, which provided crash courses for UNIA organizers. After his 1937 visit to Canada, he toured the West Indies, speaking to enthusiastic audiences in St. Kitts, Nevis, Antigua, Montserrat, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, Barbados, Trinidad, and British Guyana. During his 1938 visit to Canada, he held his 8th International Convention in Toronto from August 1st to 17th. Despite his deportation and despite the increasing fragmentation of membership, his ideas continued to hold sway among the Black masses in America with remarkable tenacity. For one thing, the fragmentation did not always mean a difference in ideology between the various splinter groups. Many of them, such as the peace movement of Ethiopia and the Moorish American, continued to regard Garvey as something of a patron saint, even after they broke with the UNIA. Garvey died in London in June 1940, active to the end in his efforts to emancipate the race. The end of chapter 1.
Thank you, Sister Diane. Yeah, that's just the introduction. Well, I guess that is lesson 1 or the chapter 1 is
Chapter 1. It's chapter 1 and the introduction rolled up in one. So any comments and questions? We normally have questions prior to the reading of the chapter. So we will have them before the week is out. And we will prepare to answer them at next week's study. Any questions, comments?
I'll start and just say excellent job. That's all I mean, I'll add more comments later, but I just wanted to at least say that you did an excellent job, Sister Diane.
Thank you. And you did as well with the preface.
Yes, First Lady, Vice President, excellent reading. And I was following it like I was there in 1920 as you was reading it. And I'm so glad that 421 is doing the book race first, y'all, because this takes us right back into the 1920s, like we're there experiencing everything what's happening. And this is so important for us to know what our ancestors went through in the forming and building of the UNIA-ACL government. So hopefully we can do the whole book, but I don't know how much time we have. But chapter 1 is very important. And I think on the chart, it says in Georgia, we had 36 or 24 UNIA divisions in the state of Georgia.
I'll pull it up. I was looking for
it. Right. I think today we only have like Atlanta and Savannah under Ross Lazarus had a division, but I haven't heard them been active lately. And there was another division under President Johnny. But we have to get back to having 34 divisions in our state before we leave this earth. So study that chart, as Miss Education Coordinator said. We're going to have questions from that chart. And chapter 1 is so important because it gives you an introduction. But the whole book talks about the struggles of our ancestors in building the UNIA in the beginning days. So good job, Miss Education Coordinator.
Thank you. It's kind of like a roadmap too. It's kind of like a roadmap to what's to come. And then I guess the rest of the book is gonna go into more details of the various things that was touched on in the introduction or in chapter 1. So it's a good way to recollect all the events. A lot of dates were tossed out. So it would be good if somebody could or if we could do a chart, kind of just, I think, yeah, just like a date thing, like a timeline thing, which might help with our recollection of the different things. But if time permit, I'll see if I can create something to help aid us in our studies, because there was a lot of dates tossed out.
Yeah, that will, as you were going through it, that image was coming to my mind. It's some good information, but in hindsight, I mean, it's Garvey's life. It started, his birth, August 17th, 1887, ending with his death, July, or was it June 10th? June 10th, 1940, but it kind of highlighted the major years. It kind of skipped over some of his youth, but once it got into his adulthood, pretty much every year there was some important facts that were being shared.
Yes, I agree. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Everybody shy.
If everyone is good, I guess we can close out the meeting, and then we could, go over the questions next week. And if we get an opportunity, we'll jump into chapter 2. But in the meantime, Brother Ross, would you mind closing us out if no one else have any more questions or comments?
I'm good.
Okay, if you will, everyone, come off mute, and Brother Ross, you have the floor.
President Ross, you there? Oh, did he drop off? Oh my God. I know he did.
No, I'm here,
Somebody else.
and my mic is not muted.
You're good. We hear you now.
Okay, I'll do it again. Put your black fists in the air. One God,
One
One God,
one aim,
one aim,
one destiny.
one
one destiny.
Africa,
Africa
for the Africans.
for
for the Africans,
Those at home,
those at home,
and those abroad.
and those abroad.
Race first.
Race first.
Race first. Peace and blessings, everyone.